Hey everybody, I'm sitting in the back of my 1998 Chaparral 305 V8 Mercruiser sterndrive, and I've got to do some troubleshooting. I don't know what I'm going to find yet. It's still pretty early. I was out today on big water, Saginaw Bay, trying to do some fishing. And this is, I think, my third trip out this season. I encountered a misfire and a loss of power. About 2 weeks ago I was out, and I noticed as I was coming in at part throttle at maybe 1500 to 2000, at light throttle there was just a little bit of a vibration. It didn't feel quite right. Kind of filed that away, came back this week, and the engine fires up and runs and idles okay. But as I was motoring out, again, at just above a fast idle at 5 miles an hour or so, and down, pushing water, it seemed like it was off a little bit. And then when I went to put power to it, when I got out to the main water, it seemed like it was low on power. But I got up and ran, and we went out about, I don't know, the water was a little bit rough, so I was probably running 20 miles an hour-ish, give or take. The waves were supposed to be 1 foot or less by forecast, and they were actually about 1 to 2 to maybe even 3 at times. Strays were at 3. So you couldn't go too fast. Anyway, on the way home, very definitely had a significant misfire. And again, idle feels okay. You put a little power, start coming up, and you can feel the whole thing just shake. The rearview mirror for the ski mirror on here, you can see it vibrating. It seems that the faster you run the engine, when you get above 3000, it seems to smooth out. I tried wide open throttle. Coming back, the water was smoother. And when you got above, all I could get was 4000. Now normally this boat will pick up and plane and run 46 to 4800. Depends on the load you got in it, but at least 46. So it feels like it's low on power. It was smooth there, but as I throttled back to around 3000 or so, the misfire seems to be increasing in speed. So last time it was 1500, and then it was maybe 2000, and now it's 3000. So I tried to be a little careful the rest of the way in. All right, this afternoon I'm digging into my Mercruiser Alpha1. This engine is started to run rough, and it's progressing and getting worse. It's a 1998 Mercruiser Alpha1, horsepower rating 220, and it's what they call a Gen Plus engine. It's a Vortec. It's basically, it's a Chevy GM Vortec version with a 2-barrel carburetor, the Merc Carb on it. Because it was starting to get old, I did upgrade ignition parts like only less than 30 hours ago, like 3 years ago. And so that was plug wires, cap, rotor, the ignition pickup module, the trigger that's inside the distributor at the same time, and I put in a brand new ignition coil. All those parts from Mercruiser standard, with the exception of the coil, is a Sierra coil. The fuel filters, 2 years old, 2 functioning years old. I put it on as I was winterizing the previous year, so it's got 2 seasons on it, 17 hours. And I know generally the book says replace the filter every year, but again, you only got 17 hours, so I really don't expect the fuel filters in trouble. I'll probably check it in this process, but that's kind of what I'm up against. My game plan is check for water in the oil, check. I've got spark plugs pulled, and check for color and fouling, and a few of them were wet, like they had some gasoline on them. While the plugs are out, you want to check the cylinders, and I've got a little bore cam, bore scope, and I took a look inside the cylinders, and I see no water in the cylinders. Now, going back for a second, you know, marine engines with water-cooled exhaust manifolds, there's a multitude of ways you can get water in the cylinders. You can have gaskets leak, you can have exhaust manifolds crack, you can suck it in through various kinds of operation through the exhaust. So I just wanted to rule out water as a cause. I think I've done that now. While I have the plugs out, I have a leak-down tester. It's a form of a compression test. Instead of cranking the engine, you put this into a cylinder, you put compressed air on it, and you measure the leakage. And as long as I got the plugs all out and I got the thing sitting here, I'm going to take the time to do that check. A lot of times they like to do it with the engine somewhat warmed up, and I'm not going to have that opportunity, but we'll give it a try. Inspect cap and rotor for carbon tracks. I've already taken one look at that, but I'm going to go back and do it again. We'll take a second look. Ignition wires, you can measure the resistance on them and see if we got a bad spark plug wire. There are some static tests. This engine has Thunderbolt 5, they called it, ignition system, which has a trigger in the distributor, and then the ignition amplifier and the spark advance control is all in this Thunderbolt module. It's bolted to the to a plate on the left-hand port side exhaust manifold. And there are some tests that you can run for that per the service manual. I'm going to put in new spark plugs. I intend to test the electric fuel pump for volume and flow. The way this engine was running, I really don't think it's a fuel supply problem. I really don't think it's fuel filter or fuel pump, because it runs bad at part throttle, but the harder you run the throttle, then it seems like it clears out even though it's down on power. I mean, years ago I had a fuel filter plug. I didn't change it soon enough, and it plugged up, and you know, we were pulling water skiers, and you know, you'd be running along at wide open throttle pretty good, and then the fuel would gradually drop out, the engine would lose power, and you'd go down to an idle, basically. You know, it would just go down and stall. And that's not what I'm getting, unless it's a halfway plugged fuel filter. Anything's possible. We could be fuel starving. It felt like ignition. But I've learned over the years that if you think you got an ignition problem, look at fuel systems. If you think you have a fuel problem, look at ignition systems, because the two interact with each other, okay? And they frequently, the symptoms will resemble each other. Now, then I'm going to go to the carburetor itself, check for accelerator pump. I found a service bulletin from Mercury from some years ago about, hey, you know, this is what to look for in carburetors. Now, I'm kind of a carburetor guy from way back, so I'm not afraid of them a bit. It's just, you know, they gave some tips. And one of the ones is that to check for main venturi flow at 2,000 RPM or so. And what that means is you have to rev the engine up and look down the carburetor throat and see if it's flowing fuel. And one of the things that could be a problem is you have two venturis, you have two barrels. And one, if I understand this intake manifold correctly, they're separate circuits. Some engines, they're mixed. I think these are separate. It's a dual plane manifold. And so the top plane feeds 4 cylinders, the bottom plane feeds the other 4. And you could have a fault like a plugged up main jet and be restricting fuel to 4 cylinders and running normal fuel on 4 cylinders. And you know, that might match some of our symptoms. Don't know why that should be, but you know, carburetor hasn't been apart and down in years, so. I have something that I bought for my outboard years ago called a direct voltage adapter that you hook your digital voltmeter to, and it will measure voltage on the primary side of the coil. And it's really intended for the magneto type spark systems in outboards, where you don't have a battery. They're driven by magnets. But the instructions do have instructions on how to do a Mercruiser, how to do a battery-fired coil, and what to look for. And so that'll be a handy tool. I want to kind of see if I can figure out what's there. I have a timing light. At some point, right now I can do a lot of static checks indoors. When I get through the static checks, if I'm happy, if I don't find anything, I'll move it outside and put water on the lower unit so that I can start the engine, and then I'll do that carburetor fuel check. I'll do a timing light check, not setting the timing, but putting a timing light on it and changing engine speed to see if that Thunderbolt module is doing what it ought to do, which is advanced timing with engine speed. Depending on how some of that comes out, I may disconnect the tach lead. I got to go up under the dash. But if you have a defective tachometer, you can load the signal to the coil and cause the coil to misfire. Now, when I was running, the tach wasn't missing a beat. It wasn't like I was, seeing things dropping out. So I'm kind of doubtful, but we're going to go down. We're going to go down through everything on here. If this was a car, I'd make a change. I'd go out on the road and try it. I'd come back. I'd make a change. I'd go out on the road and try it. The nearest water's 30 miles away, and I want to get this. I don't want to get stuck. I'm not going to get stuck. I've got an auxiliary. I could eventually get home and stuff. I can motor myself back, but I want to kill this. I don't want to piecemeal it. So if I have to, I'll go through and I'll do a carburetor overhaul and rebuild. I've gone and picked up parts. So first of all, I have all my old parts. I said I replaced all the ignition parts. Well, I've got the old cap, I've got the old rotor, I've got the old trigger, I got the old wires, I have a fresh set of spark plugs. So if anything is bad, I can substitute something. I have a brand new ignition coil that again, if in doubt, I'll swap. The carburetor, I've got a full gasket set that I had on hand, and I have a full rebuild kit with the needle and seat and all of the things. And as I said, I'm not afraid to rebuild the carb if I need to. What I'd kind of like to do is do this in a little bit of a systematic fashion so that perhaps I can catch what it is and not wipe out the evidence, if that sort of makes sense. So I'm going to start with the static checks as far as I can go and see if I can find anything suspicious, and then I'll go out and do some things on the garden hose and do some checks, and depending on how those things come out, I say we'll go from there. So that's my game plan. This boat didn't come out of the garage last year. I got busy. I was working on the Camaro projects and painting and stuff. I never got the boat in the water last year. So I winterized it 2 seasons ago. Drained the gas, siphoned it out, down, did all my normal winterizing, fired it up here this spring. It worked fine, and this is my 3rd trip out, and it looks like about 3 or 4 hours of run time this year so far. Not a lot. Again, I go fishing, and the 8-horse kicks me along, and I control for hours, and the big motor stays shut off. So not a lot of time. So what could be wrong? Why is it misfiring? Well, frankly, the first thing that worries me is that the engine's really old, and while it's taken care of, one thing that boats can do is you have exhaust manifolds and so forth that are full of water. And sometimes their gaskets will fail and you'll get water in a cylinder. Sometimes they'll crack. The exhaust manifolds and risers could be an issue. It's been quite a few years. I had the, the right-hand side, the left-hand side off the engine, and inspected the gaskets and inspected that manifold. Oh, goodness. I'll have to look at my book, but probably 7 or 8 years ago. and everything looked good. I did not pull the other side off. So probably one of my greatest concerns would be that I have, an issue there. So where I'm going to start, I'll show the oil. I'm going to dig in, I'm going to pull the spark plug wires, and I'm going to pull the spark plugs, and I'm going to look at the plugs and see if I can identify a cylinder that's misbehaving based on spark plug color. Is the plug fouled? Is it melted? Is it whatever, right? So let's start there, and then, I'm just going to kind of go down the list. If I can find a bad plug, I can look at the plug wire, I can look at the distributor and the cap and see if there's an ignition problem. I mean, even though the new parts are 4 years old, doesn't mean I couldn't have a bad wire or a bad cap. So here's the dipstick, and I've wiped it once, but you can see it's hard with the reflection of the light. But here's the full mark. The oil's actually just a touch above the full mark, but it looks nice and clean. There's no evidence of water, foam, anything on that order in it. It's not discolored. I mean, it's only been running a few hours. Like I say, it's nice and clean. And I checked it at the dock as soon as we came in. So the engine had been running, it had been running at speed. We came in and shut it down, and I dipped it then immediately. Kind of with the idea that, if there was water or something in the oil or contaminant, you would expect to see it there when it's hot. And I did not. And now that I got home and it's cold, I'm about the same way. But pulling the plugs out is hard because everything is underneath the manifold, and a number of them are behind the hose for the exhaust manifold. I won't be able to get the camera in there and show you that, but that's my next job, and we'll see if we can't get things taken apart. I got all the plugs out, managed to break one. Now, basically they're not white lean, they're not running hot. They're beige to white. And it's kind of interesting, the back side toward the side electrode seems to be the dark, spot, like maybe the flame temperature the flame doesn't get around the back as well. But so let me start with this is 1357, this is 2468. They were a little bit wet. This one I've let these sit a few hours, but number 8 was a little bit damp. Like it had a little bit of fuel on it, which now sitting for a couple hours it's dried off. 7 was kind of the same way in the back. It was damp. This one that I cracked, even right now, appears to be a little bit damp. And it hasn't. You can kind of see there's a little bit of a reflection in it. So it's and on the other side is they're not like none of them are oil fouled or in bad shape. Now this one's number 4, and see it's pretty much white. Same thing here on number 6, and this one's actually pretty dry. So it seemed to me when I pulled them out that I had a few of them that were damp. None of them were dripping. They're not corroded. This one, which is number 1, has a little bit more deposits on it than the others. But nothing's really out of bounds. I mean, I need to replace this one. I think I have a spare back in my other shop. I may just, as long as I have these out, I'll probably go buy a new set and replace them. But now that I have them out, I didn't get any water or anything come pouring out of the cylinders like there was a leak. Like I had something leaking water into a cylinder. So I'm going to dig in here and take a deeper look. Alright, well, I've been through with my little borescope camera, and I'll review the pictures and I can probably show you some. What I'll say is I didn't roll the engine over, so I didn't get a good look at the cylinder walls on all the cylinders, because a couple of them, the pistons are top dead center. But as I went through them, general impressions, all the ones where I could see cylinder walls, you can see the crosshatch from the honing on all the walls. I did see a couple where there's some vertical scratches in the wall, but they must be pretty fine because the crosshatch is still there. Couple, 2 or 3, where the top of the pistons were looked like maybe they were fuel wet, or maybe even had a little bit of oil, deposit on them. Likely fuel, but they were a little bit darker, and there were some ones that were clean. Now, this engine's 25 years old. It's been running for a long time. It gets stored every winter. And I go through the standard winterizing process and fogging oil and so forth. But it's possible that even with the fogging oil and things that, something rusted a little bit and I got some light scratches. Engine doesn't consume oil in the hours that I run it through a season. So anyway, just looking at cylinders, I don't see any evidence of water, like anything's leaking from a gasket or a manifold or something. That was my first concern. Well, here's a look inside the cylinders. You can go in through the spark plug hole on number 1, and the piston is the dark part. You can see the valve reliefs, and it's kind of rotating the camera around. The light colored up on the top are the valves. So that one's kind of a top, and you don't see a lot of the cylinder wall. Now here's in 4, you can see the cross hatching, and it's a little cleaner cylinder. You can see the valves there to the left. Here's 3, and you see some of the vertical scratches there on the wall, or scuff marks, whatever, and the damp looking color of the top of the piston. There's cylinder 6, and it's much drier looking in the center. Has burned whatever deposits off, so it must have been firing well. There's 5, which is a little bit wet looking, and a few more of those scratches. But again, note the crosshatch on the cylinder wall. It's all still there. There's 7, another one that looks a little bit glossy on the piston. Number 2, and it's kind of upside down there. You can see that, I think that's the exhaust valve up at the top. So some wear on the cylinders, but not horrible for as old as this is. And here's number 8. That piston's like at the bottom, so you kind of can see the whole cylinder wall pretty well. And that piston's a little cleaner looking. Not getting a real good shot of it, but it doesn't look as wet as some of the others. I've got a compression gauge here, but to do compression, you got to put water on the water pump so you can spin the engine over. And I think I'd rather try to do is get my Leakdown tester. Going in to do the cylinder leakdown test, I've got a kit. It's one of these Maddox cylinder leakdown kits. And what you have is 2 gauges and a regulator, and you feed it air from your air compressor. I've got 100 psi air down here. They don't want you to go over 100, that's the limit for this one. And it has a hose that you put to the cylinder, what you have to do is thread this into the cylinder. I hooked up the gauges, I hooked up my air compressor. I dialed it up to 90, I don't think I need to go further than that. Yeah, 89 psi on, this is cylinder number 1. So that's pretty good. You can hear there's a little bit of leakage. When I ran all my numbers, some of the cylinders were just about perfect. I mean, 90 to, to 88 to 89. Very little leakage at all. And then I had old number 3 in here, which was about 80. And I rolled it over a second time, and it still came back at 80. Frankly, I'm pretty happy with most of the check. I can take a look at the carburetor too. I'm an old carburetor guy. I may have to pull it off and put a gasket set in it and rebuild it. But for this morning, the good news is I don't see any evidence that the engine hard parts are in trouble. Now I'm going to go back through the fuel and ignition. You might normally say I should leave the hard parts for last, but if I had something significant and had water in a cylinder, timing, right? I had this issue yesterday. I'm getting at it quick. If I had some major failure, like I say, with water in the engine, I wouldn't want to sit here for a week or two while I go and find my service manuals and order parts and come back. I kind of wanted to rule that out so that, if you had water sitting in a cylinder rusting for 2 weeks, that would not be a fun thing. So I think I've got that knocked out. Okay, well, I pulled off the air filter assembly, flame suppressor. If I recall correctly, there are 4 fasteners that hold it down. Oh, and I've got a Phillips, and I need a straight blade. These are deceiving because they're cross-style screws that look like they would be Phillips, but they're not. This is a lot of fun on some of these boats, and this one in particular, because it's tucked in the back here underneath, so it's kind of hard to reach. Now I'm going to look in the distributor again, cap and rotor, and make sure that nothing has gone bad. I'll call it. Oh, there it goes. All right, how are we doing here? So the cap has a gasket. Looks like the cap's, like it's been running a little. See some deposits on the terminals. Don't see any evidence of carbon tracking. Which would be looking something like a black crack in the cap. I really am worried about dropping the screws out of the cap. And the stupid thing keeps flipping itself upside down. Oh. The rotor. Again, at first look, I don't really see anything that looks out of. So, without the book in front of me, I think there are 3 things to worry about. 3 or 4. One is that pickup could be bad. 2 is that the box could be bad, and as I just said, it's no longer available. So and that's the timing and the ignition module. If that's bad, I don't know what I'm going to do yet. I've seen some things that suggest you could replace the whole distributor with a new one with a different style, but then you lose the timing curve and everything that all the nice stuff that was in that module. The shift interrupt switch could be bad because the shift interrupt switch cuts ignition, and if it started giving me trouble, you could have it cutting the ignition out on you. And the tachometer could potentially have a problem that would short ignition signal to ground, although I know when things were running, the tach was not being interrupted. That might be a clue. The tachometer was reading completely normal. It wasn't varying like I was losing power to the ignition system. My brand new 3-year-old ignition coil could be defective. Okay, so things I'm going to watch out for. One is on the, there's a shift interrupt switch here, which could be having a problem and could intermittently be cutting off, telling the ignition module to stop sending spark. So I'll need to probably test that. It's got a couple of connections here. You can see there's the distributor, the toothed wheel, which is the pickup, and this is the sensor that triggers the spark, and that wheel that's the set that triggers it. And there's the rotor. Now to check the wires, this is going to be a little bit trickier. I have a voltmeter, volt-ohm meter. I can set that guy on resistance. I'll let it auto range for now, but I may end up setting the range to something useful. Generally, these carbon style wires have a resistance. It varies from wire to wire, but you're probably around 10,000 ohms per foot of wire. Now, I'm not going to measure the entire length of the wire. Each wire is a different length, so I'll get a different reading each time. The wires are numbered at the top of the cap. I know where they are because they're laying alongside the engine here. So what I need to do is lift the cap back off and go inside here and pick up each terminal for each plug and measure it to the end of the wire. And there's my measurements across the top, followed the firing order. So one was 17.8K, about 18K, then 13. The longest wire goes to number 1, so that's 17. That makes sense. The shortest wires are to 7 and 8. And that, see, 8's at 13.4, 7's at 14. So everything's consistent. Looks like all my wires are between 13 and 18, and the coil is at 8, coil wire. No complaints there. I mean, the wires could have a problem with insulation and be arcing, but doggone wires are only 3 years old. These are dressed in their clips and things, and I'll take a little bit of a look at them visually as I'm putting them back together, but at this stage, I'm going to put the plugs back in and prepare to hook the wires up, and then I think I'm going to move to testing the ignition system static under hood, making some voltage measurements and things by the book. Okay, I've got a fresh set of plugs. These are Delco MR43Ts. I've replaced the spark plugs, tested the wires. At this stage, I'm going to reinstall the distributor cap. I've inspected it. I don't see any cracks. I've looked really close. I've looked at the rotor. The only way to look at the rotor harder would be to remove it, but in this particular engine, that assembly is Loctited on, and you can break the Loctite. I kind of would resist doing that until I saw some need, specific need for it. So I'm going to screw the cap back on. I have the air cleaner, the flame arrestor off, so I have better access in there, and the choke is now closed. You want to be real careful though that you don't drop anything down inside the carburetor, because it's really a good idea if you can put a rag so I don't drop anything. And then we'll go in here. The cap has a notch so that it goes in only one way. And then you got to go around here and run these screws down. And they look like they should be a Phillips, but they're not. They're a straight. They're a an X style straight. So let's run these guys in. What we're going to do in a minute is I'm going to try to do some spark testing. We're going to do some ignition system checks. And at some point I'm going to roll this outside so we can do what I'll call dynamic checks. Distributor cap's back on. There are 4 screws. The one in the back is really tough. You gotta basically do it all by feel. There's a gasket on the cap, so you gotta make sure the gasket's there when you put it back. But screw them all down snug. Then there's a test, and I'm going to do this with from the coil. And I have a Lyle tool, a 50850, which is a spark gap checker. You dial that down and set it to the gap that you want, so that it's a gap that is equivalent to what your spark plugs are. These are 45 thousandths. So we dial that back a little ways until it's about 45 thousandths. You could tinker with it. But the main thing is you're going to want to see if you got a nice spark. I'm going to go from the coil wire, which is snapped on like that, and we'll plug it back into the coil, like so. And then you need a place to clip it. And this relay has a metal bracket that's tied to the manifold. So I'm going to try that. Okay, ignition coil's back down here. I've got this again clipped to what ought to be ground. But I'm not going to spark it quite yet. You know, there's an issue about whether the tachometer could be a problem. The gray wire here goes to the module off the negative side of the coil. And it also should go to the tachometer, and it's reading 46 ohms, which seems like it ought to be enough. In other words, the tachometer is not shorting to ground at this point. So now I'm going to switch it to voltage, which right now has nothing. And they want you to. I'm going to go turn on ignition. This test is really for whether you have spark or not. And I have spark, but the question is whether it's, you know, does it look correct or is it weak, right? So if I come over here to the purple one, I have 12.25. So I have voltage and essentially have 12 volts there. So then the book says to disconnect the red and white coming out of the distributor and check for 12 volts. And I've got those right here. So let's figure out how to. And these are just bullet connectors that pull together. There we go. So I need 12 volts coming from the module. And I guess I have, interestingly enough, I have 11.4. So it's not quite 12 volts coming from the module. That's interesting. But it isn't specific. It just rounds it off to 12. Reconnect it. And disconnect green. Let's see if we can get a spark. I've rigged up just some number 14 wire. The module connector, bullet connector is inside, so you can't, you know, like tap the bullet connector to ground. So I put a piece of wire in it. And the instructions say you got to hit it 2 or 3 times a second to generate spark. Okay, wire's hooked up. Got my spark arc thing there, and ignition's turned on. Let's see if we can get something here. Looks like a nice blue spark. Certainly can't complain about that. All I'm doing actually is brushing the end of the wire over the screw threads on the bracket here that go to ground. I'm getting lots of sparks. That much works. Okay. Well, that's all the static checks I can do of the ignition. I'm going to try to do a fuel. I'm going to disconnect the fuel line, hook a hose to it, and try to measure pressure and volume and see if the fuel pump and the fuel filter are okay. I maybe could have started there, but I didn't think they were necessarily a problem. It seemed like ignition, but given where we are. Alright, now to break this fuel line loose, the main fitting is a
feels like it's an inch, and the flare fitting is a 5/8 tube nut. And we'll see if we can get this dude to pop loose. There it goes. But you don't want to let the larger nut turn when you loosen or tighten the other one. There should be, get a rag underneath here in case there's any fuel dripping. I have some 3/8 fuel hose. Got it clamped over the flare on the carburetor fitting on the fuel line. I've got an adapter here, which is a piece of steel tubing with a flare, and again I've got a clamp on one end, a clamp on the other end, and a fuel pump vacuum checker gauge, which this is an old school gauge for doing mechanical fuel pumps and vacuum gauge. This pump is supposed to be between 3 and 8 psi according to the book. So I am going to key it up and let's see what we get. You just have to be really careful about fuel leaks. In the event that one happens, my lights are all LED and they're up out of the way for the moment. If something leaks, I will have to deal with it really fast. And there's no power to the fuel pump unless either one, the engine is cranking, it comes off the starter solenoid relay, or number two, it has oil pressure. And if it has oil pressure, it'll run. So I've got the fuel pump running. I jumpered out the oil pressure switch down by the oil filter. I'm getting about 6.5 psi on it. So that's pressure. I'm running the blower just because, you know, as you're doing things with fuel fittings, you really want to make sure you don't have any fumes in the bilge. You know, I'm doing clip leads and stuff. If something decided to arc, I don't want it to blow up in my face. Safety, safety, safety. Alright, I'm going to try a volume test now. And I've just got the open hose in a 16-ounce clean water bottle. And I'm going to try to fill the bottle and kind of see how long that takes and see if it makes sense. The factory does not provide a specification for that, but I think we can deduce one and get kind of close. So I will I'm going to go up here, turn on the blower just in case of fumes. So that's a pint in about 15 or 16 seconds, but that's set like 16, 17 ounces. So let's see what that comes out to. Now this is another one of those things that's down underneath and hard to see. The filter's down here. And this puppy was really on tight. I had to get all the way down in here. A little oil on the seal of the fresh one, clean engine oil. It says it wants 2/3 to a full turn, so. Now that I got a few ounces in there to prime the pump, I'm going to go hit the timer and let's see what we get. I know I've got a few already, but let's give it a shot. Alright, well that was about 15 seconds. So I got a little better performance, but I had a few ounces in the bottom, so it's about a wash. Essentially the fuel pump was okay, or fuel filter was probably okay. Here's what I drained out of it, and I don't see any evidence of water in the bottom or sediment. I mean, when you turn the filter upside down, you get both sides, so nothing serious in the fuel. But I also went back and did a calculation. I did some online lookup, and this engine at wide open, if you do, well, there's two things. One is do it by horsepower, and pounds of fuel per horsepower hour.
then they had some data for a Mercruiser, and a 5-liter is about 18 gallons an hour. And at this rate, the pump's putting out 25 plus. And I think if it was a 350, I mean, it goes by horsepower, it would be in the low 20s. So 25, 26 gallons an hour in the pump ought to be plenty to keep a carburetor happy. So that isn't the problem. And I'm going through everything that isn't a problem. Well, now I'm going to dig in and take look at a couple things on the carburetor while I got a chance. First of all, I'm going to take this throttle linkage off. It's a 7/16. So to get the throttle linkage off, you need to take the nut off the front, at least on mine, nut and washer, and then at the back right there's a rear one. And there's not enough clearance. You need to take them both off so you can get it off all at once, and then you want to make sure that you don't spin the adjuster and knock the adjustment out of line. Then what I'm really trying to get to is, can you see in the carburetor, you got the choke and there are 2 booster venturis, and the choke will probably want to close if I move the throttle. We don't want to scratch anything, we just want to hold the plate open. And I want to see if the accelerator pump is working. So let's do a... Looks like I got a double shot. In other words, both sides are pumping. So that means there's at least enough fuel in the float bowl to feed the fuel pump, or feed the pump. Get an accelerator pump shot. So it passes that test. Now for my outside check, I got the engine fired up and warmed up. Kind of hard to see, but with a timing light, I'm getting the marks on the balancer. It's set for automatic timing, and I don't have 3 hands, so I can't show you, but when I rev the engine, the timing responds, which means that the ignition module is responding. Second thing is whether or not you get fuel from both venturis when you rev it up. And I do. So, the thing I noticed though was I had a bad stumble when I tipped in. The first time here, and I stalled the engine, which probably points to a fuel issue. So I think I'm going to dig into the carburetor a little harder and see if we got something there. Nothing on the right. I'm going to be careful I don't want to melt out the exhaust shutters by running too long at high exhaust temps. I've done that before, so you got to be careful. So I'm going to try to get it to 2500 and see if I got flow there. Still only on the left side. Well, at 2500, that might be a clue. Only feeding on, you start to drip. And if one
side's pulling over and the other side isn't. And at 2,500, I mean, the throttle isn't open that far because we're not loaded down in gear. Yeah, in gear. So at that speed, it's still pulling off the idle circuit. Alright, but there is a difference side to side. Last time you could see some flow. I'm going to try to give it a more of a rev here. There's one last test I want to run with something called a direct voltage adapter. Now, the instructions are a little ambiguous because the colors aren't all the same, but this says for a Mercruiser you can do this. And so the coil high voltage lead is connected to the spark gap tester to ground. The plus side of the coil is connected to my meter on a high voltage, a 400 volt level scale with their little direct voltage adapter box that's plugged straight into the meter. And I'm supposed to be able to do is just hit the key and crank it, and not without it running, and see what the voltage level is that I get. And they said multiply the scale reading by 10. So let's see what we get here. I'm just going to crank it. Alright, so it was showing 10 to 11 volts. It should be between 75 and 150, and so this is multiplied by 10. So if I was at 10 volts showing there and I multiplied by 10, that's 100. That's like right in the middle. I can't see what the spark checker's showing, but I've had spark because the engine's been running, so I'm sure that's okay. So that's correct primary ignition voltage, and that checks out. So now I've run all the diagnostics I can on things. Having been through the test, I wanted to make sure that the ignition module was at least halfway responding like it was supposed to. I checked the timing, and I didn't set it to base timing. I wanted to see what the module was providing, and it was a little bit advanced. When you rev the throttle, the advance went up as you would expect. I don't know what the exact numbers should be, but it was clearly advancing the spark and being active. With that being the case, I'm going to say we've been through the entire ignition system. I'm going to assume it's okay, and I'm going to move over to carburation. The interesting event from a carburetor standpoint, it started okay. It ran on the choke. As the choke came off, it seemed like it was being a little rough. Now, the challenge right now is, the diagnosing things is that the engine isn't stalling. The engine isn't dead, right? It's not like there's no spark. It's not like there's no fuel. It's a degree thing, right? It's misfiring and running rough. So as the choke came off, it was closed, and as this warmed up and it came open, it started to be rough. And my neighbor was out there and he could hear it too. He said, "Oh man, it got kind of rough." And then as I was getting ready to do some of the work here, I don't know if the camera was on at that point, I revved the throttle and I kind of gave it a gun like this. It immediately stalled. It started right back up again, but obviously it was too lean because when I tipped in, it fully warmed up, choke open. As soon as I cracked the throttle quickly, it stalled. At high engine speed and high throttle, you can look down the bores and you can see the booster venturis flowing fuel. At 2,000 RPM no load, the one, as we're looking at the carburetor on the left-hand side, starboard side, if you were running the boat, was starting to drip at 2,000, and this one wasn't. At 2,500, it still seemed as if they were imbalanced. If you really crack the throttle, you can see good flow on both sides, but is it enough? You can't judge that. That's hard. There are two choices. One is to open up the carburetor and get a look at what it looks like inside and see if there's anything obvious. Is the float grossly misadjusted? Is there sediment in the bowl? Is there whatever? If there's nothing obvious, then I'm going to unbolt it and remove it and take it off and probably put a full carburetor kit in it and go through it completely and do a full overhaul. But sometimes you don't need a full overhaul. Sometimes you can just put in little parts, clean things up, and then life gets better. The fact that this engine is 25 years old-ish, carburetor's never been apart. I bought gaskets years ago so I could go in and do some things because it was running rough for a bit. And then it straightened itself out. It's been running 15 years since then, and I've still got those gaskets. That's where we go right now. I'm just going to try to get the top off of this so I can get a look and see what the float level and so forth looks like. Been here before. We'll put on a backup wrench. Get this fuel disconnected first. Rag underneath to catch it. Just, when you're working on these things, I've said it before, but I'm going to apologize, but I'm repeating, but you're working with gasoline. This is full of gas. We were doing tests with gas. Gasoline fumes are heavier than air. And this boat's like a bathtub, right? So whenever you spill gas or you have a rag soaked with gas, all those fumes head to the bottom of the bilge. And the more there are, as they get deeper, they'll get up higher. And then a spark, from a light or overheated lamp or, anything could set that off, which is why you have blowers. And so as we're working here with gas in a confined area, there may be some times where I'll go turn the blower on and just ventilate it just to be sure, because as soon as I open this up, I've got fumes that are going to go down. This rag is collecting drippage, and so the fumes are going to go down. And generally they aren't going to go out unless you evacuate them. So now I will pull the drain plug out, and that lets the fumes kind of slowly work their way out of the bottom. But that takes a while too. End caution, but that's how I'm approaching it. So all right, so if I'm going to take this off, I got to get that's the choke, electric choke wire. Here's a ground wire in the harness that comes up here to the choke. I will also say that these carburetors, these electric chokes, are very, very rich. I saw in the service information, I'll put that screw back for the moment, that they recommended a leaner adjustment than the original service manual. There was a later bulletin I ran across by accident online. And I'll tell you, I set this considerably leaner than the factory in the beginning because it just wasn't right, and I'm a carburetor kind of guy. And also I don't see on this carburetor a vacuum brake, and a vacuum brake pops the choke open when the engine fires, and these boat carburetors don't have it. And so until the electric heating element warms up, it's kind of a pain, because when I fire this up, I go run it at 2,000 RPM, 1,500 to 2,000 for like 2 or 3 minutes until the choke opens up. Because otherwise it sits at idle, kind of going chug, 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 putting out a lot of smoke and fouling the spark plugs. Well, there's a little hair clip down here for the accelerator pump link. So we can take that off. Got a little tray here to put things in. Frees up the accelerator pump link, which is now hanging. And it was in the middle slot, so I don't want to lose that. And then there's another one here for the fast idle cam. Been a long time since I had the cover off of one of these, but now that screw is longer because it's in a well that's taller. So it's probably, it's a 1/4 or 3/8 inch longer than the other ones. You have to check, because sometimes they have some screws in the air horn. On the 2 barrels that aren't there, but I remember on the quadrajets there were screws inside the air horn that you had to release. No linkage on the choke. It's very simple compared to a hot air choke with linkages there. There's a little spot on the casting right there where you can put a screwdriver and lift. And that broke the gasket loose. You want to be very careful with these not to scratch or mess up the gasket surfaces. Okay, so after getting all those screws out, disconnecting the choke, and coming over here, I had to there's a screw that holds this idle cam in. Looks like that, and it was in there really, really tight. I had to work at it a little bit to get it to break loose, but now it's out. I should have done that first before I started lifting off the body, but so now it's free, and it's going to want to drip a little bit. I'm just going to set it over here upside down for the moment, and we're just going to take a quick look at the inside of the carburetor here. Alright, so what do we see? Well, there's a little bit of sediment in the bottom. Otherwise, it doesn't look horrible. I don't see anything sitting in the main jets, which are in the front up there. So let me get the light on it. Like that. The two holes in the front are the main jets, and the one in the middle is the power valve. Accelerator pump goes in that hole. There's a few things that look like they could be sediment, but they're stationary. They're not going anywhere. And that's a look, with the throttles open, that's a look down the bores. And very definitely, this is a split manifold. The lower cylinders are fed by the bore on the right, and the upper cylinders are fed by the bore on the left. And upper cylinders, what I mean is it's a dual plane manifold, and if you look here, this is the upper, and it feeds cylinders 2 and 1. And then lower here you see 4 down in the bottom, right there. That's the lower part of the lower plane. This Venturi feeds 1 and 2 and 8 and 5. So 1, 2, 8, and 5 are fed off of here. And the other cylinders are on the lower part, and they're fed off of there. Interesting just from I'm going to call it a diagnostic point of view. Okay, so I've measured the float level. I can't really, it goes from this dot on the side of the float to the bottom, and it's hard to do it and hold it flat and level. Depending on where you measure to the dot, my first measurement on here was 310. It's supposed to be 343. And I guess if I go to it that way, yeah, it's pretty close either way. So the float level's not off far. The accelerator pump doesn't look like it's in bad condition. The cup is still there, and I'd been getting a shot out of it. I don't see sediment. I don't see anything stuck in a passage yet. I think the answer is I need to pull this off, do a thorough cleaning, put in the fresh kit, put in a new needle and seat, and so forth. And get the carburetor fixed up. I've decided I'm going to take the carburetor off the engine and do a tear down and cleaning and so forth. I'm putting the top back on for a minute. I had it off for an inspection first, but I'm not going to put all the screws in. I'm putting just a few of them here. I want to break this fitting loose, and it's a whole lot easier to break it loose while it's fastened down, because I want to replace that filter and probably do some cleaning. So we'll just crack that loose. That's good. The fuel is disconnected, and then I just need to take it off the engine. I've disconnected the battery. Because this bracket, it's got the starter solenoid on it, and I think that's probably hot even with the ignition off. And they're smaller. They look like they're 7/16 or so. There's not a lot of clearance to get to these. And they're not particularly tight. That's interesting. Well, I mean, they don't need to be horribly tight. Well, I have all the nuts off now. These are a little challenging sometimes to get off. Most of them you can't get a socket wrench on. You have to do them by with an end wrench and it's tight quarters. So what I'm trying to get right now is the washers. First I want to get the this rear bracket off of here. Just being real careful, because when I remove the carburetor, I don't want to drop any nuts or bolts or anything down inside the engine and have to go fish them out. I forgot about the PCV hose. Now we'll take the whole thing off. And I'll just take the valve along with it and separate that hose later. That goes underneath the water hose. There we go. Just lay a rag over the inlet so nothing drops in there. Now I'm going to just thread the fuel filter back in there. I'll cinch it down once I get it on the engine and I want to install the fuel line, but we'll start here. Do not want to cross thread these guys. They'll ruin the whole job. And because there's a spring, they're sometimes challenging. You kind of got to hold it in against the spring and turn with your fingers until you get it like that. And if you mess one of those up, it's a lot like the ones that were on Quadrajet 4 barrels years ago too. And many people would cross thread them, and then fixing them is really, really, really hard. And I don't want to forget to cinch it down, so alright. So I'm going to leave it just a few turns loose here until I get it on the engine. But she's all assembled. That's a disassembly, clean, and reassembly. Put in a carb kit. That's what it does. Alright, so there's 4 bolts. I've got the PCV valve hooked up and the hose reconnected. In the back is this battery or starter relay, and its bracket needs to go here. I got all 4 bolts in. They're kind of tough because they're hard to reach, and they're prevailing torque nuts, so you can't just spin them down with your fingers. As I said before, I have a ground wire here that I need to clamp down. So now I can tighten these screws down. And there's the wire for the choke. Fuel filter. Now that I'm here, we can snug that down. That's the other one that you don't want to strip out or cross thread. Okay, and then you want to hold this one with the backup wrench and tighten the front one. And I need to hook up the throttle linkage, and I think I put it back where it was, but this, so with it in neutral idle, we ought to be able to put it together. Want it like that, like there, with it upward, and then I should be able to just slide them both on, right? With pushing, it says push back a little bit, and then slide it on. It's too tight, so it must have turned to turn. Let's see if that works better. Yeah, that is. Okay. Now one more time though. Make sure that, well, that seems about right. I'm pushing them together to take the slack out. Let's see what going to wide open. Looks like we're wide open. Pull it back to neutral. Let's make sure that we're sitting on the idle stop screw. And we are. Well, I'm going to run these down, and on this one it said run it down and then back it off a half a turn to make sure that it's free and can turn. And this one they said snug down, but make sure that it, again, it needs to be able to pivot a little bit. Well, let's see if it'll light up. Started right up, but sure, idling fine. Up and we'll call it a job. I don't think I need to touch the idle. It's smooth. I know I could set it back to base timing and adjust it, but for now I think I'm going to leave it alone. If I have a problem, then that's what I'll do. I'm going to let her warm up here a bit. Well, now it's warmed up, I'm going to try that one more time. So I've been out for the day to do some fishing out on Saginaw Bay. The boat's back in the barn, and the carburetor job did the work. It did the job. And that was the root cause, that was the problem. It fires right up, starts nicer, runs without shaking. The water was a little rough today, so you know there was no max speed run, but I did get a spot where it was smooth enough to get to 4,000 RPM with like half throttle. I wasn't even leaning on it hard. So the power's better, the speed's better. Answer is it was a carburetor problem. In the meantime, you know, we went through diagnostics on everything else that could be wrong, and it all checked out. So tearing the carburetor apart was the right thing to do, and it was well worth it. It's running great. That's all for now.